I'd like to welcome Maria Ressa, prominent journalist and CEO of the news website Rappler. Thank you very much for taking the time to speak with the Sasakawa Peace Foundation.
Thanks for having me, Jeff.
More than 30 years have passed since the People's Power Revolution, which brought about democracy in the Philippines. Looking back from 1986 to today, particularly in light of the Duterte administration, as well as the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, how would you evaluate the state of democracy in the Philippines?
I think like the state of democracy all around the world, democracy is dying, if not dead. And, a lot of that is largely because of the shift in our information ecosystem. Journalists, news organizations lost our power to be gatekeepers. We used to protect the public sphere. We lost that around 2015, 2016 to technology. Social media platforms now distribute news. Facebook is the world's largest distributor of news, except that they've also abdicated responsibility. We live in a world today where facts just don't get as much distribution as lies laced with anger and hate. And so what you're seeing in every democracy around the world is that these cheap armies are slowly cutting away. I called it death by 1,000 cuts, right? They're cutting away at democracy by making facts debatable. If you don't have facts, you can't have truth, you can't have trust, you can't have democracy.
And is there anything specific now with the COVID-19 pandemic and all of the challenges posed by that?
Yeah, so I think the underlying factor is the enabler of the rise of digital authoritarians. I mean, you're not talking just of Duterte, you're talking about Orban, Bolsonaro. We're seeing what's happening all around the world right now, right? So I think tech is an enabler. It's like it threw fuel to the fire because there definitely was, starting in 2014, a nostalgia for simpler times. The world just became too complex and people wanted somebody else to make the decision. And we saw it in India with the election of Modi. In Indonesia, I was covering the presidential elections, which were then between Joko Widodo, who won, versus the son-in-law of Suharto, who had been in power in Indonesia for nearly 32 years, right? So we saw this yearning. In the Philippines, it's for the Marcos years. So people are saying it's just too complex. It's I got too much to do. Someone else do it. So they were yearning for a simpler past, but the past isn't so simple. You throw on top of that COVID-19, and what we're seeing is state gets more power in a time of a pandemic, and that power in a country like the Philippines consolidates power. So what we've seen I believe the Philippines has had the world's longest lockdown. We are still, today actually marks kind of an easing of some of the restrictions, but we still have curfews every night from 8 p.m. to 5 a.m. To leave your house, you have to have a quarantine pass, strict lockdown. So we have all of these things where there's tremendous amounts of money, tremendous amounts of power, a very security-driven, military-driven response to a pandemic. The Philippines, like Brazil, so President Duterte, like President Bolsonaro, appointed former military generals, retired military generals, to head a public health response, a public health crisis. And I don't think it's a coincidence that in the Philippines, you see the incidence of coronavirus cases still exponentially increasing. Having said all of that, I think there are three huge things that have happened during these few months. So President Duterte announced the COVID-19 lockdown March 12th. And unlike other countries where medical doctors were at the forefront, he was surrounded by men in uniform. And it took effect on the Ides of March 15th. And since then, on May 5, the largest broadcaster, ABS-CBN, employs about 11,000 people. They were shut down. A minor regulatory agency gave them a cease and desist order within a few hours. This network went black. The last time that happened was in 1972 when Ferdinand Marcos declared martial law and shut down ABS-CBN. That network stayed shut for 14 years until the People Power revolt, right? The second, I think, is the passage of the anti-terror law. The bill passed the House of Representatives in about 5 days during a pandemic lockdown, right? And President Duterte signed it into law. It essentially gives a small group of cabinet secretaries the power to declare any critic a terrorist. And if they do that, that person, that could be a journalist, could be me, right, could be arrested without a warrant and detained, jailed for up to 24 days. And then I guess the last thing I would add to that is the conviction that happened to me during the lockdown on June 15th. Judge Montesa in the Regional Trial Court in Manila found me and a former colleague guilty of cyber libel. I laugh because the story we published in 2012 was before this law had even been enacted. But the legal acrobatics to bring 8 criminal charges, I have 8 arrest warrants against me, show you where we are today. And I think the decision, in order to convict me and my former colleague, they had to actually change the statute of limitations for libel from 1 year to 12 years. And then we filed a motion for partial reconsideration and the judge denied it and then extended it to 15 years. So this moving target is laughable, isn't the right word. Maybe Kafkaesque is a better word. You know, it's a strange time. By next year, I'll have been a journalist for 35 years. By next year, it will be 35 years since People Power, since 1986. And it's shocking to me where we are today. But also, much as we see these draconian responses to coronavirus, to the pandemic, you're also seeing Belarus, you're seeing Thailand, right? Where it seems that when power holds or pounds too strongly, people will rise up. But then you also have Hong Kong and the security law with China. So it's a strange world of creative destruction when it comes to democracy today.
Rappler itself is a social news network. It seeks to provide high-quality investigative journalism to inspire community engagement and also promote action for social change. What is Rappler's strategy to reach across different segments of the population to inspire these kinds of broad social movements within the Philippines?
When we were creating Rappler in 2012, the elevator pitch is one sentence, right? We build communities of action. And the food we feed our communities is investigative journalism. So the classic Venn diagram, you know, investigative journalism overlapping with technology, overlapping with community. Our first community was climate change. That we believe that climate change, good governance, these are hand in hand, right? And so these were the communities. So instead of when you're doing a startup, instead of having a marketing budget, what we did is we began a civic engagement arm. We threw out the marketing budget, and our civic engagement arm built communities, first in the physical world and then virtually in social media. And those communities are still there. We had as many as 35 partners, both NGOs, 35 to 38, once Super Typhoon Haiyan came in 2013, right? So government was a partner of the civic engagement arm. It was called MOVE. So we saw technology as an ability to actually jumpstart development. And we had things, yearly events like the Social Good Summit, where we tried to use technology for social good, social media for social good, technology for social good. We even, started something called Hack Society. How do you use technology to solve some of these long-standing problems? How can you use technology for SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, right? It was, the beginning of Rappler was fascinating and fun and mind-blowing, because you can imagine a better world. Social media changed the way people consumed news. And in 2012, I could only see the positives because I felt that this could convert new, younger audiences, and it did. Rappler's demographic is, our largest audience is 18 to 34 years old. And that's part of the reason we're powerful. We're growing with our audience. 2016 was when the dominoes began to fall, when the design of social media, when Facebook decided that it wanted Twitter, right? You could see that that was what happened. And they began to prioritize growth over the protection of the users, growth over facts. And that growth, and I can actually peg it to one decision that all social media platforms have used, which is how do they recommend growth to each of us. They use friends of friends. And by using friends of friends, it actually builds into these platforms polarity, division, us against them. It builds filter bubbles in it. Eli Pariser wrote a book very early on talking about filter bubbles. Well, it came to its logical conclusion in 2016. With the election of President Duterte in the Philippines, a month later was Brexit, and then you go all the way through the election of Donald Trump, the Catalan elections, and so on and so forth.
So how do organizations like Rappler strategically engage with and inspire the public in the face of these challenges while trying to kind of bring together this effort toward broader social change?
You stick to the facts. We always say hashtag hold the line. You hold the line. Look, technology was the enabler for the rise of digital authoritarians all around the world, right? But once they were democratically elected, they then used the tools of democracy to crumble democracy from within. How do you build community? You enshrine the facts. I know who I am. I know why I do what I do. I know why we set up Rappler. So when the government came to attack us, it's very easy to just push back, right? We have to hold the line because it's almost like what we're seeing in many countries around the world is it's like a bulldozer is trying to take away your rights. And you as a citizen, you're going to have to hold the line. You're going to have to interlock with other citizens. And I guess that's part of the reason I always ask this time period. It's crucial for every person in a democracy to ask themselves what they are willing to sacrifice for the truth, because that is what's at stake.
The Sasakawa Peace Foundation, as a foundation based in Japan and of course in Asia, has committed to building networks among countries in Southeast Asia. And this includes an ongoing initiative to strengthen cooperation between journalists specifically in Southeast Asia, which is actually a project in which Rappler has kindly participated in the past. I wonder if you could speak about what is the significance of building these kinds of collaborative networks among civil societies in countries in Southeast Asia, as well as with partners like Japan.
I think it's crucial to build these networks. We are fighting against a network of networks. And in order to fight that, physical network of networks is the first way to do it. But the second way is to also understand how digital networks behave. So yeah, absolutely. I think, the problem is in the last few years is that those with power, the people, governments, regulatory agencies who have power, have never had to deal with technology in the way that technology was being built. And so they left it alone. The journalists on the front lines, the human rights activists on the front lines, we are the ones who feel the impact of decisions made in Silicon Valley. And our network of networks, the networks you put together, have got to fight back far more significantly than we've been doing. There have been different news organizations that have come together in the past. I think we've never dealt with an information ecosystem quite like it is today, where in the past, each of the countries had their vertical silos of organizations, news organizations, right? But the social media platforms cuts across the world uh, horizontally. So a lie told in Tokyo is instantaneously in Manila, is instantaneously in New York. And this is why those Silicon Valley decisions have had the worst impact in developing economies, emerging democracies like we have in Southeast Asia. If people don't know what's facts, what's right and wrong, what the truth is, I mean, these are blurry things already, right? But if the facts aren't there, if they don't know who the enemy is, if they don't know who to trust, that's the first goal of information operations. It's not to actually make you just believe one thing, it's to make you doubt everything. Because if you don't, they tear apart the institutions you used to believe in, they make you distrust everybody in a situation like that. And that's very easy to do politically. In a situation like that, the voice with the loudest megaphone wins. Right? That's the world we live in today. So if we don't move to restore integrity of facts, then we will be manipulated. It's quite insidious and we will lose our democracy.